know that I've opened all 3 videos here from the same spot, but it's just because the hotel is right next door. The sign makes like a good backdrop because this is the sign for the campus. And all 3 stories are connected to Auburn University because all 3 are involving students who were killed. But this is our last day here in Auburn, Alabama at Auburn University. And for this story today, I'm actually revisiting something I talked about back in 2019. When it happened, it happened between here in Auburn and in Montgomery where I live in. So because it was so close to me, you know, I made an update video about it. There was another female from here in Auburn, Alabama who was kidnapped and murdered. And I talked a little bit about it back then, but there wasn't a whole lot of details out. But now those details are available, so I'm making the full story. We'll see the locations where it all happened, and we are going to talk about the murder of Aniah Blanchard today. Aniah Blanchard was a student here at Auburn University, as all these other stories have been the same. She was a freshman here from Northport, Alabama. Now, Aniah Blanchard's stepfather, he's a UFC fighter. His name is Walt Harris, and he's actually like ranked number 11 in the UFC heavyweight ranking. So I would assume that's probably pretty good. But on October the 24th of 2019, a family member contacts the Auburn Police Department, and they report that they couldn't get a hold of Aniah. The Auburn Police Department then go looking into it, and they discover that the night prior, Aniah was talking to her roommate. Just after 11 p.m., Aniah tells her that she is on her way home. And then around 11:40, she gets a really weird roommate from Aniah that said she was with a man named Eric that she had just met. The roommate said the message just didn't seem like something Aniah would say. Police then discovered that 7 minutes after that message was sent to the roommate, Aniah's phone was powered off. Now, at this point, we know a lot more than what we did at the time. They believe that Aniah managed to sneak that message with the name of who she thought was kidnapping her. Obviously, maybe she knew she was in trouble at that point in time. Another theory is that maybe they saw her send that message, and that was why they took her phone and it went offline 7 minutes later. And it's even been theorized that maybe the person who took her sent that message that intentionally had a wrong name attached to it in Eric to like throw detectives off a trail. The Auburn Police Department immediately start looking for Aniah. They pull her bank card statement and her phone data and started trying to track down where she went and what she did that night. The first thing they noticed is that Aniah made a purchase at this Chevron gas station here in Auburn. And yes, this is the same exact Chevron gas station that was involved in yesterday's video. Why this particular Chevron keeps popping up, I don't know. But they immediately came here and they pulled the footage, and it showed Aniah inside of the convenience store. They see a man walking into the Chevron behind Aniah. They both came in at different times, just moments apart from each other. And they see in the footage that he watches her the whole time they are inside the store. Then they pull the footage where they're outside, out here in front of it, and they see him get into Aniah's SUV. And that's when they get curious. They immediately go to the public. They go to the news media, and they release this picture asking for the public to help identify him. Well, within hours, they have positively identified this man as Ibrahim Yazid. They start searching for him at his family member's house and his known associate's house. They pull up his criminal history and his background. They discover that Ibrahim Yazid is out on a $295,000 bond at the time all this is going on for possession of marijuana, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Their first thought, as I'm sure is the same as all of yours, is how in the world did this guy get a bond to get out of jail? Well, it's a long story, but it stems from a law in Alabama that allowed it. On top of that current charge, in his background, he also had an arrest in 2012 for ramming a police officer with his car, where he was charged with aggravated assault on a police officer. He gets out of jail, and in 2017, he gets pulled over. He physically beats down the cop and tries to flee. And then in 2019, he and 3 other men robbed and beat a 77-year-old man nearly to death inside of his hotel room in Montgomery. There's no reason that this guy should be free at the time this went down to even be wanted for Aniah's disappearance. It's unbelievable. So detectives come to this apartment complex here in Montgomery, where they know that Ibrahim Yazid has some friends. While they're here, they get a tip from a neighbor that in the last day or so, an abandoned vehicle just showed up in the parking lot over here. So they go over and they run the tag. Sure enough, that vehicle, the tag returns to Aniah Blanchard. They immediately put their police tape up and cordon off the area and wait for detectives. Well, detectives come. They open up the door to the vehicle to find that the whole front interior of the car is covered in blood. It's all over the dashboard and the front driver's seat and the front passenger seat. It is everywhere. The majority of the blood, though, was concentrated on the front passenger door. It had been obliterated by a gunshot, and then it had all this blood and tissue all over it. Basically, they say that there's so much blood in this vehicle that it's almost a guarantee the victim of this shooting did not survive the injuries. That there's so much blood inside the car, there's no way they survived. A few hours after discovering her vehicle here in this apartment's parking lot, U.S. Marshals catch up to Ibrahim Yazid in Pensacola, Florida. They pull him over. He tries to fight with them, and obviously they won. In the first pictures or video that we get to see of him, his face is all busted and swollen because of where he tried to fight him. It's wild. Well, he immediately waives extradition and is immediately brought back here to Auburn, to Lee County, Alabama, to talk to detectives.
Right.
And it's my understanding that Mr. Ibrahim has indicated that he desires to waive extradition and go back to Auburn to face charges.
Alabama has determined that they'd like to extradite you. And Mr. Edens, can you please advise the defendant of the crime?
It's homicide, Mr. Ibrahim.
I'm in custody now. There are people from Alabama here so that you can be taken back to Alabama. They're here to take you so you can get back there.
Now, their first thought is, where's Aniah? So they open a line of conversation with him. They start talking to him. And at first he's talking. He tells them where he's been and who got him there. Well, then the detectives move on to questions about Aniah and where she's at. And he immediately shuts down and asks for a lawyer. Detectives orchestrate with the public a massive search party involving the police, city and state officials, thousands of volunteers from all over, one of which was actually Natalie Holloway's mom, Natalie Holloway is another Alabama girl who was on a class trip to Aruba, and she was kidnapped and murdered. And so her mom is trying to help find Aniah, who is now been kidnapped and potentially murdered. The search parties went on for days and days. They started searching every road, every wooded area, and every nook and cranny between Auburn, Alabama, and the apartment complex where her car was found in Montgomery. After all these days, though, they still had no sign of Aniah Blanchard. And the detective started to get a little deflated about it.
It hurts. I just pray that she's okay and that we get her home soon. She's amazing.
They put their heads back together and they decide to go back to Yazid's words, his statements before he shut down, and see if that led them anywhere. Well, all of a sudden, the police announced that 2 more arrests were made in connection with Aniah's disappearance. The Auburn Police Department arrests Antoine Fisher, and he's charged with disposing of evidence. And then they arrest David Johnson for hindering prosecution. Now, David Johnson, he really didn't know much. But then they go to Antoine Fisher. They, make him a deal that they'll drop the charges if he talks. And he spills his guts. He tells them everything. He tells them that Ibrahim Yazid came to his house asking for help. So he agrees, and he follows Antoine to this cemetery here. This is a very remote location, but this is where they came. And Antoine says that he sat in the car while Ibrahim carried something off into the woods, and he was back there for about 20 minutes or so. And then he came back to the car empty-handed. They then left. They drove to the apartment complex in Montgomery where the car was left. And then Antoine carried him to David Johnson's house, and David Johnson was the one who had agreed to carry him down to Pensacola. So detectives get Antoine to show them on a map where Yazid and he stopped that first time. That spot is right here off County Road 2 in Shorter, Alabama, almost exactly halfway in between Auburn and the apartments in Montgomery where her car was found. Now, the Alabama law enforcement agency descended here on this area in massive numbers. They only searched the area for just a few minutes, and they discovered some human remains back behind the cemetery here. And they were 100% identified as Aniah Blanchard. Now, they had obviously made a deal with Antoine Fisher for that information, because right after that, the state of Alabama dropped all of the charges against Antoine and David Johnson, focusing solely on Ibrahim Yazid. Now, Ibrahim sits right here inside of the Lee County Jail to this day, awaiting his trial. During one of his pretrial hearings recently, the district attorney told the judge that based on the wounds, Aniah actually fought back, and at one point even grabbed Ibrahim Yazid's gun as he opened fire on her. Just like all other crimes, because he is charged with some serious felonies, as soon as they processed him into the jail, they took his DNA and entered it into the system, and wouldn't you know it, they got a hit. So now, Ibrahim Yazid is, not only is he charged with Aniah's murder, but he's also charged with the murder of a cold case in Montgomery, Alabama from 2008, the murder of a man named Stephen Hamby, and the attempted murder of another woman. He shot her in the face, but she lived. He approached them, he tried to rob them, and then he shot Stephen Hamby and killed him. Then he shot the woman in the face, but she ultimately lived. So once he answers for Aniah's murder here, he'll have to go to trial in Montgomery for those. So pretty much, Ibrahim Yazid should never, ever get out of jail again, which is a really good thing because he is obviously a very dangerous person. Now, like I said earlier, there was a state law that allowed Ibrahim to get bail on those serious charges he was in for kidnapping and attempted robbery before. Well, Aniah's family and some state representatives got together, and they have developed state legislature, which now has been approved, but it is called Aniah's Law. It fixes that whole ordeal. So if you are charged with a serious felony like kidnapping or attempted murder or murder, you can't get bail and get back out. We will come back and revisit this again once he has gone to trial and everything. Who knows how long that'll be. It's already supposed to have happened, but then COVID hit and it backed everything up. And so once he does go to trial, we will come back and I will keep you updated. That is going to do it for this episode today. It's our last episode here in Auburn. We did 3 days here and 3 stories in a row of students at Auburn University that suffered horrible, horrible deaths at the hands of other human beings. It's horrible. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you're new here, go down and hit that subscribe button. That way you get notified when my videos come online. If you want to help support the channel, you can check out the links in the description box below. It helps us keep making videos like this. Thank you all. I will see you again in the next day or so. Please, all of you, be safe and be healthy.